Hi, my name is Diana Rumachek, and I currently live in Dallas, Texas. I hailed here from the Midwest, but have been in Dallas for several years now, so I'll call this my home. My want to thank Sadhu first for giving me the opportunity to give this a conversion story, and I look forward to the opportunity, and I hope it can be a benefit. So my conversion story is rather complicated. It really began in the second grade when my parents converted to Catholicism. They didn't convert because they liked the religion, they converted because they had the best school system in town. And their thought was that in order to go to the Catholic school, you should be Catholic. So they both converted. And this is way back pre Vatican II. So it was much easier to join the Catholic Church then. And so that's what they did. Prior to second grade, don't think I'd ever heard the word God except maybe in vain. If I did, I don't remember it. So it was a brand new experience for me. And really, from the get go, I was pretty drawn to religion and to God and the idea of God and what that meant, and that He loved us no matter what. So I did my best, memorized my Baltimore Catechism, figured out that God was out there and that our whole purpose was to love, honor, and obey Him. So as I progressed through Catholic school, the impression I got of God was one of an angry God waiting for me to mess up so He could reach down and swoop some big evil on me, much like the God of the Old Testament. So he was angry. He was always looking for me to mess up. He was always, kind of out there. And that was my image of God for a very long time. As I progressed through grade school, we did all of the nice Catholic things you do, got confirmed and graduated from Catholic school, and then ended up in a public school and had not been in public school, obviously, for many years, and was exposed to a different concept. For the first time, I heard the word or the term that you needed to be saved. I didn't know what being saved meant, but I certainly thought if that's what I had to do to keep God in my life and active, then I would do that. So I did that. I can't really remember an exact time that I did it. Um, there were many opportunities. So, I was 16, so I don't really remember exactly what that time frame was. But I did that and started going to a Methodist church, mostly because I had a great youth group and I enjoyed the youth group. And so went there. I kept doing that. And I met my husband my senior year in high school. He was a Pentecostal preacher's kid, which was obviously very different for me, not only from being Catholic, but also from being Methodist. And I had never heard of Pentecostals hardly at all, except they were the women that wore weird clothes. And we ended up getting married after graduation from high school. This was in the mid to late 60s, and that's what you did. So we got married, had our first child very quickly, and most of the time we ended up in Assembly of God churches, so very charismatic, full gospel kind of churches. I took and was able to stay in that same mode, or able maybe not be the right word, very much stayed in that same mode of God is an angry God waiting for you to mess up. And as soon as you did, He was going to come down and punish you. It was also at a time in that kind of area of religious experience where it was very big for the wife to be submissive to her husband. It didn't matter what he did or what he suggested. Your role was to be submissive to him, and you were to give everything to him, and he was to be first. And that's what my husband expected. He expected to be first. He expected that I would do whatever he suggested. And if he did something that I thought was crazy, which he made many of those decisions, I was supposed to just go along with it because he was the head of the household and he would answer to God. So we operated that way for a long time. And then finally, he ended up having several affairs, and he ended up having one with a very good friend of mine. And it was shortly after that that I kind of said, I don't think I can do this. And he kind of said the same thing. And so we divorced. I was really very devastated by the divorce, though. I mean, I'd married him when I was 17 years old. He was the father of my two children. It was really all I knew. But by this time, I'd gone to nursing school. So I had a way to make a living. And when we divorced, I kind of went on my own and had a great job, continued to work. But because I was so still emotionally unready for a divorce and really emotionally unready to live on my own, I remarried very quickly. And I ended up in not only the same type of relationship, but actually a worse one. That's the correct English. He was not only emotionally abusive, but physically abusive. I knew after about 6 weeks of marriage, I'd made a mistake, but I was too embarrassed to admit it. And I stuck around for 11 years, if you can believe it or not. And we stayed in the same church. We were in a very conservative Baptist church by this time that also very much felt that women should be submissive to their husbands. And my role was to tough it out, because actually one of the pastor's wife said to me one time that God cared more for my holiness than my happiness, which kind of struck me as odd, but I listened and stuck it out for a long time until finally the abuse reached a point one day where I just said, I can't do this anymore. So I moved out with the help of his son. I moved out. And the church called me and told me I had no biblical reason to divorce him. So all of this resulted in my being very turned off by conservative Christianity. So after our divorce this time, I did not remarry. I stayed single for a long time. And I started reaching out to other more moderate, I guess, religions, is what you could say. I went to a church for a while who had a female pastor, which of course I had never been in before, and heard some different kind of teaching. I heard more of a teaching about love and more of a teaching about acceptance, and found this very comforting. And I stayed in that church for a while, ended up moving back to Texas where my kids were living by that time, moving to Texas where my kids were living by this time, and stayed around them, continued to work, found myself back in the Catholic Church after a bit of time. My daughter had told me that I would find a kinder, gentler Catholic church. And I did. I found a church that was much more accepting, and it may have just been the parish I ended up in, but the church was very accepting and very open. They helped me get both of my prior marriages annulled, which is important in the Catholic Church if you want to remarry. Helped me work through that process. I was able to get active in the church. I was also active in a singles group and did, really did a lot of things. I also began at that time to read a lot of work of Jesuits, so Father James Martin and Mark Thibodeau and some of the other Jesuit writers that are out there, and really found a more open community. And really, that was my first introduction to imaginative prayer, or Lectio Divina. So, because I'd never really heard of that before. And I wasn't really practicing it very much, but I at least was exposed to it. And when I would work to have a quiet time, I tried very much to use that as my framework. Well, things went along pretty well until like the most devastating event of my life could happen, which is my youngest daughter died. She was 41. It was an unexpected death. She was away on a business trip for a conference in Las Vegas. She died in her hotel room. She was on a phone conversation with someone, or I'm sorry, a text conversation with someone at 6:30 in the morning, but then failed to make an 8 o'clock conference call. So they did not find her body till 2:30 in the afternoon. So we spent several hours, her husband and I, kind of frantic about where she was at. And then finally they did a wellness check, and that's when they found her. So this was quite a crisis of faith for me. I was very close to Rachel, And I could not understand why God would take her. I had no realm of understanding of what was wrong. She was, and I know everybody says this, but she was really one of those people that lit up a room when you walked in. Um, People adored her. Everyone she talked to thought they were her best friend. Um, she was doing meditation long before I was, and really doing a lot of Buddha's kind of study. And I was just absolutely devastated. I couldn't go to church for a long time. Uh, and the few times I did try to go, all I would do is sit there and cry. And in a Catholic church, that's kind of not really looked upon as being very, acceptable. So I just quit going. I said, I just won't go. And God and I went to chapel one time. I don't know what you know, but you can go to the chapel and the Eucharist is there, and they call it adoration in the Catholic Church. So one Friday I went to the chapel for adoration, and my whole goal was to sit in the chapel and scream at God. And I get there, and there's like a whole bunch of people there, so I can't scream. So I just sat in the back pew and cried. It took a good bit of time for me to get over that, and for me to finally get to a point to where I said, I can't, live in grief. I have to, I still have to move on. I still have to work. I still have to function as a person. Um, and so I delved back into the readings I'd been doing from the Jesuits. I started to also look at some uh, other things. I began to look at contemplation. And as a result of that, I ended up meeting another man, and we were married later. And he's been very supportive. But as I have grown, I've started to get more into Father Richard Rohr and the Center for Action and Contemplation. And I started a meditation practice. It really started out of the book, The Immortal Diamond. It introduced me to God in a concept that I had never been familiar with before. And as I started meditating, I started to realize that there was a calmness that came out of that I had always been searching for. I'm not always perfect in it. Sometimes I take and can't get through 20 minutes. And sometimes I get through 20 minutes just fine. I do have to use a sacred word to do it, to keep me focused. And I continue to read and do more. Right now, I'm taking a course by the CAC on inner wisdom, which is opening me up to a whole area that the conservative Christians I would hang around with would call heresy. But I'm been opened up to that, and I'm finding it very freeing, and have discovered Jesus in a different way and a different perspective. And I have to say that I've come to love him much differently. And I've also come to feel that love from him much differently. So that's kind of my story. That's where I'm at. And I hope it's a benefit. And thanks very much for listening.